lovies. It's David McGillivray here, horror icon and comedy legend, and Truffaut of Smut. And the reason I mention that last description is that it was given to me by my guest today. And if you've seen my Wikipedia page, you'll know that that is what I now want on my gravestone. I did want, he didn't outstay his welcome, but now I've changed my mind. This is Little Did You Know, the chat show, in which I talk to people I find interesting, and I hope you agree. And every so often I mention Patreon, and as soon as I mention that word, down here, that appears as if by magic, and that will be of particular interest to those among you who have more money than sense. Right, let's get down to business and introduce my guest. He's a writer and broadcaster for whom the word eclectic is not sufficient. The breadth of his knowledge astounds me. I've been known to say he's my favourite broadcaster. I still stand by that. Will you please say hello to the very wonderful Matthew Sweet?
Hello, David. You want it on your tombstone. It'll probably be in both our obituaries, I dare say.
As you get older, everybody says this. You begin to realise what the first line of your obituary is going to be. Right, now, first of all, I need to look more closely at, is it a lockdown beard?
No, it's not. No, it predates lockdown. This started in January. And it looked a bit wilder during lockdown. But as soon as I could, I feel, this sort of thing is a job for a professional, not an amateur. So there's a guy down the road who does it. And the first trim I had after lockdown, he insisted he was going to cut it like Skanderbeg, the founder of the modern Albanian, well, not the modern Albanian state, but this kind of the mythic hero of the Albanian state. So for some reason, I decided to go along with that, and it was a bit like this, and it looked wrong, frankly, off an equestrian statue.
And please tell me it is natural and that you didn't dye it to make it look like that.
How dare you? I mean, how dare you?
Stripes are so perfect.
If I was going to dye it, I'd do something different to this, I think.
No, you mustn't. It's perfect. Plus, I want to know where you got those glasses because I want a pair.
Well, I got them off the internet for about 25 quid. They're one of those ads that pops up, but they've been. I'm delighted by their success, actually. In fact, I'm sorry to name drop, but I suppose this is what we're here to do. But RuPaul has also complimented these glasses. When I took my eldest daughter along to DragCon UK, there we were standing in the t-shirt queue, and he just pointed at them and said, "Love your glasses." And the thing is, the estate agent down the road also asked me where I got them from. I thought, do I tell him? Because I don't know whether this Southeast London postcode is big enough for two of these.
I wish I could name drop like you, Matthew.
I think you can. I think you can.
No, I'm learning. I'm learning from the greatest. Now, we're going to talk about all kinds of things during the next 45 minutes that probably you don't want to be reminded of, and probably we're going to talk at inordinate length about Dirk Bogarde's leather trousers. Does that make sense to you?
It does make sense to me, yes. Yeah. I mean, I'm ready just to be guided by your agenda here.
Lordy, that way madness lies. I'm just about to hold up a book. It's Matthew's wonderful book, Shepperton Babylon.
There he is.
There is Dirk in the aforementioned leather trousers. Because you mentioned this in your book, Matthew, a lot of us began talking about the aforementioned trousers, and a mutual friend, Stephen Fennerty,
yes,
bought me for my birthday this photo.
Oh, wow. Oh, yes. The singer, not the song. The final scene with Dirk lying on what looks like a very nice pillow with a sort of a kind of frou-frou edge to it. I like that. Lust in the Dust, as I think we should call that.
Indeed, the real title is The Singer, not the song. Yes, Dirk is.
I thought you were going to bring up a pair of actual trousers then, David.
Oh,
Not just a photo.
I do have a pair upstairs in my dressing room. I'm sure that's not a surprise. Perhaps we'll save that for Patreon viewers as an added extra. Let's get back to the subject. We're not going to talk about it right now. Of course, the singer, not the song, is the film. That's Dirk expiring in the arms of co-star.
Yeah, there was a discourse of Dirk Bogarde's Leather Trousers as soon as that film was released. It was the only thing that the reviewers talked about, really. So I didn't start this conversation. In fact, it was part of the production process. Those trousers were very controversial, even as that film was going before the cameras, specially made by Dirk in some Spanish sweatshop somewhere.
Italian, I think you're.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry. The film was made in yes. Okay. Well, it's nice to be corrected, actually. Yes.
I certainly have
Yeah.
read your book, Matthew. I devoured it. Now,
Should be Italian, of course, because he's called Anacleto in the film, which of course was a very popular pudding at Pizza Express, but they seem to have taken it off the menu.
well, Pizza Express itself has come off the
It
menu.
has, yes.
So many branches have closed, but we're not here to talk about Pizza Express as much as you may like to. Let me just remind everybody watching that Matthew was born in Hull. He did his doctorate at Oxford on the Victorian author of The Woman in White, Wilkie Collins, and then burst upon the scene with his book, first major book, Inventing the Victorians in 2001. Now, Matthew, did those two things, well, the doctorate on Wilkie Collins and inventing Victorians, is there a connection?
There's a connection in a way. In a funny way, there's a kind of a conflict because that book about the Victorians, which you kindly described as my first major book, it's also my first minor book, was a sort of answer to some of the unease that I'd felt whilst I was researching that PhD. And got a bit worried about the version of the Victorians that was being presented in seminar rooms and in lectures, which seemed not only very reductive, but seemed sort of informed by the desire to punish the Victorians for not being us, for not being as kind of laid back as us. And I always think this was a position that rather overestimated us in terms of laid backness or all of these things. So in a way, yeah, they're slightly in conflict. And I was writing them both. There was a point when I was at least revising the DPhil whilst writing the book. And I can remember writing a newspaper piece around the time the book was I was writing it, and before my Viva, and it began with this phrase: "Nobody hates the Victorians more than Victorianists." And that, I'm sorry to say, created a bit of an atmosphere in my Viva all those years ago. So yes, these things are slightly at odds, really.
Is it fair to say you attempted to sex up the Victorians?
Oh no, I don't think anybody needs to do that. I just looked and saw what was there. Really, the Victorians, it doesn't need me to do that. If you can't see where the sex is in Victorian novels, for instance, you're not reading them properly.
Let's go even further back to your childhood.
Oh my God, really?
Afraid so it has to be done.
I didn't notice you hanging around Hull in the 70s, David.
I love Hull, and you do too. I know. I want to know first, when you were daydreaming at school, what were you daydreaming about? Did you imagine that you would become an observer, a commentator, a writer, or did you fantasize about being a creator of the kind of, let's say, films that you enjoyed?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I suppose there was always a bit of me that wanted to be an actor because I like doing that kind of in the playground, really, and then at college. Um, and I love acting. I love actors, and I sort of think that what I do now has enough of that in it to keep that little part of me satisfied. But that's what I always thought about. I think because the people who I admired were actors, and so
Who,
that's why.
who were you admiring at that young age?
Well, I mean, they were just people on the telly, really, the stars of. Um, I suppose if I'm absolutely honest about it, it's probably the stars of Doctor Who who kind of put that idea in my head.
Going to have,
And
we're going to have to come back to Doctor Who, obviously. But first, while on the subject of Hull, I happen to know that you have a particular love for a joke shop called Dinsdale.
oh my God, have you been to Dinsdale's?
I haven't, but after reading what you wrote about it, I want to go. Tell us why this joke shop is so special.
Well, Dinsdale's Joke Shop is in a rather lovely Victorian shopping arcade in Hull, and it's a real Hull institution. And in the window, I think the window display now has the same things in it that I was looking at in the mid 70s. So like plastic ice cubes with flies inside them, rubber custard creams, very kind of perfect simulacra of dog turds. Although dog turds were white in the 70s, weren't they? So they're slightly different now, I suppose. Um, Strange packets of things, mysterious envelopes with, promising to bring kind of uproar and chaos into this slightly Donald McGill-like seaside postcard world. The aesthetic of it is exactly the same. And if you go in there and just get to, well, actually, I'm not saying if you go in there, if you are ever in Hull, don't miss the opportunity to have the deep historical experience of going to Dinsdale's, because it connects you with the past, and it also tells you quite a lot about the present as well. You will get talking to one of the family behind the counter, and they will, if you ask, they will bring out their tins of 1930s itching powder and all kinds of stuff.
Now, how is it that these jokes, vintage, as you say, some of them going back, I don't know, I'm guessing to the 1950s, how is it that they're not being sold?
What you mean? That, well, they're in the window. They're for display only, aren't they?
Even inside, you can still buy these jokes.
Ah, well, the 30s itching powder. I think that's a special case. That's brought up. There's no price on that. That's not on display. You have to ask for it. And if you did want to buy it, I suspect the price would be quite high because it's something that ought to be in the V&A, really. This. So, but the things you can buy there are fantastic. I always take people there if I'm, escorting a visitor round Hull. And the thing I usually recommend is the plastic ketchup bottle. Whenever I go and do radio stuff in Hull, I always take the producer there. So there are a lot of BBC producers who now have a fake ketchup bottle in their cupboards that produces this very convincing stream of, it's actually just a piece of string, a piece of red string. But if you squeeze it, it moves so fast that you think you're about to be hit by a stream of ketchup.
If we haven't made you want to go to Dinsdale's in Hull as soon as lockdown is over, our work has not been done. Let's move on to your magnum opus. Well, it is for me anyway, Matthew, and this is where I hold it up again. I just get we are. It's Shepperton Babylon. It's an alternative history of British cinema, and I absolutely adore it. You interviewed a lot of very old ladies and gentlemen indeed. A, did you have a wish list? B, did everyone you wanted to speak to you?
Ah, no. I did have a wish list, but in a way, it was a list that was produced by the very laborious process in some case. trying to work out who was with us and who wasn't anymore, because a lot of the people who, I was trying to initially find the last witnesses of the silent period in this country. Now, many of those people's careers ended, in the 20s, in the 30s, way back. And they might not have been using their own names. So some of these people have dropped off the radar a long time ago. It was a matter, in some cases, of just going through the electoral register to see if they were still out there, finding a death certificate to prove that they weren't. But of course, when we moved on to later times, slightly away from the cliff edge of living memory, it was a bit easier. But that still meant talking to people like 1930s star called Victoria Hopper, for instance, who really had not been interviewed about their film career for decades. So it was a great privilege, really, to go and talk to people who were, for whom this was like yesterday, but also who were really unused to talking about these experiences and reflecting on them. Unlike today, when careers are so long, it's really rare to have a mayfly career like these guys had now. Some of these guys.
Did they all want to talk to you?
Well, the person who I really wanted to talk to and couldn't was Hitchcock's young star, Nova Pilbeam, who is no longer with us, but who in her last years was occasionally spotted, I think, walking a dog on Hampstead Heath. She lived in Gospel Oak, I think. But I wrote to her many times. But she reclusive is the wrong word, but she just simply had no interest in speaking about this part of her life, to the extent that she was the person who a lot of film scholars wanted to talk to and had been refused by. So she gained this rather mysterious quality, which, as a person, I suspect she didn't have at all. She was just a retired lady who just had no real appetite for discussing her teens and 20s, the time before she got married, I suppose. It was. So she is the person I really wish I could have talked to.
A great shame, but you did manage some marvelous achievements in that book. It's book ended, so to speak, by two people called John M. East.
Oh my!
This is where I hold.
Yes, here is a bit of common ground for us, David.
This is common ground because John M. East, the first John M. East, was a silent film star, and his grandson was a star of quite a different caliber, and featured in my book about the history of the British sex film. That John M. East, you didn't really warm to, did you, Matthew?
Well, I wouldn't say I didn't warm to him. He was a kind of monstrous figure, really, and I think many of the people who worked with him would have said the same. He was a real. I mean, what is the word? He was a sort of
Reprobate.
he was a reprobate, and he knew he was disreputable, didn't he? And he rejoiced in it somehow. He'd been a producer, he'd worked in radio, he'd done a lot of very vague and ill-defined jobs in the world of PR. He'd been a kind of bit actor as well. So he's like he's the villain in a lost early film of Michael Winner, which I hope turns up one day. Plays a kind of Russian spy, I think. He had the script for that, and I remember spending an afternoon with him acting it out for me. When I got to know him, he was coming to the end of a long and, in many ways, rather difficult life, I think. But he always had this quality about him of being, he was like a kind of wartime spiv, really. It was as if he had a big coat and he was going to open it up and give you some ladies' tights. And I can remember
nylons it would have been.
Yeah, I remember having lunch with him in a Bernie Inn in Norbiton, or something like a Bernie Inn, and also he talked in this rather filthy way as well. And I remember thinking, I remember being rather, because he was a bit frail, so I took him in a taxi, and I remember we went into this place, and the taxi driver said something to me, something like, "I hope your dad's going to be all right." And I thought, he is not my father, because he would make a spectacle of himself. He had this kind of extraordinary vulgarity about. I don't mind a bit of vulgarity, but there was something a bit strange about John East, as I'm sure you're going to. I mean, you give me your answer to that question.
All I'm going to say, because we have so little time on this program, Matthew, is that nevertheless, despite everything, he was our kind of man,
Mm.
an extraordinary one-off and the worst Max Miller impersonator I've ever seen. Let's let let's move on to the singer, not the song. It's important because, I mean, in all likelihood, not many people watching this will have seen this film, and yet you make a case for it being a watershed in British film history, and I think it's very persuasive because prior to the film, Dirk Bogarde was making doctor comedies and silly romances for rank, and after The Singer Not the Song, he made Victim. Now,
Mm.
as I say, I think that is a very persuasive case for this film being very important indeed. More people ought to see it, oughtn't they?
It's very enjoyable, but it's also like it's a folly. It's also a kind of act of self-sabotage in some way as well. This is Dirk protesting against the rank organization, and this is a film in a way that brought didn't bring the rank organization down, but it was one of the films that made it decide to really scale down its film production and to sort of end its own dominance and concentrate more on the photocopying business in the end. Bad Timing is the film that really finished it off, the Nick Rogue film. But Sing Not the Song is really a kind of a sort of end game for rank, and it's Bogarde escaping it and riding off, sticking two fingers in the air almost.
And despite what you claim, Matthew, I believe it was you that brought this film to a much wider public. Well, it certainly brought it to me because I hadn't seen it. And as a result of reading your book, I went out and looked for The Singer, Not the Song. How about had a big influence on my life, Matthew? At that point, before you can even respond, I have to say that we have to take a break because halfway through these shows, we like to check up on what's going on with our lovely hosts, Peccadillo Pictures. So take a quick look at this. I know you'll love it. And then please join us again in a couple of minutes.
Vous avez quel âge?
22 ans.
C'est quand la dernière fois que vous avez dormi?
Cette nuit, j'ai pas dormi, mais la nuit d'avant, je crois que j'ai dormi.
Est-ce que vous avez un partenaire régulier?
Ah, t'es bien là? Je sais pas. Pas vraiment.
Ça fait combien de temps que vous vous prostituez?
Un certain temps.
Mais vous avez pas envie d'autre chose?
Pourquoi j'aurais envie d'autre chose?
Écoute-moi bien, ici la pipe c'est pas 5 euros, c'est 20. Pourquoi t'embrasses les clients?
Bah, je sais pas, ça me dérange pas. Tu peux aussi rester là à côté de moi et moi je te prends dans mes bras et moi je vais sur toi.
Very much for joining us again. It's David McGillivray here, and today my special guest is writer and broadcaster Matthew Sweet. We've been talking about a couple of his books, Inventing the Victorians and Shepperton Babylon. I want to throw in another of your books here, Matthew, because it's kind of left field. It's about West End hotels. How did it come about? What interested you? Was it the hotels or the architecture or both?
It was more the people inside them, really. The buildings themselves are fascinating. They're such kind of weirdly ideological buildings, grand hotels. They're there to kind of keep the world at bay, really, and protect you from it. You can't really see the outside world from, rather like you can't in a Vegas casino. They divorce you from the world, even though they're in these very nice locations. But it was the people, and it was weirdly the second time Albania will be mentioned in this conversation. It was when I was in Albania for the Independent newspaper, reporting on the attempt of Prince Leka of the Albanians, King Leka of the Albanians, I should say, son of King Zog, his attempt to reclaim the throne. And so I spent a few days as part of his entourage driving around Albania, with UN tanks on the streets, and the towns we were visiting controlled by rebel committees who, after he spoke, fired their guns in the air, which was rather alarming experience. And you realize that what goes up must come down. And I was talking to him about his father, who absconded from Albania when Mussolini moved in at the beginning of the war, and who went to stay at the Ritz in London, booked a whole floor of the Ritz. He was rumored to have paid for it in gold bullion, relieved from the National Bank of Albania. And it was this idea of this slightly barbarous and dubious European king lodging in the Ritz just before the Blitz starts, during the Blitz actually too, that made me think, well, who else was there, and what kind of cultures did these places generate with all of these extraordinary exiles and refugees, and also the people who waited on them, or all of those poor Italian waiters who got sent off to internment camps. And it just seemed the most incredible kind of environment that had only been investigated in a very superficial way. Most of the books about hotels are all written by the PRs from those hotels, and are rather boring and insincere books.
Again, as is so often the way with you, Matthew, previously unwritten history. The book was later the subject of a TV program. Now, my memory about your career is that early on in your TV career, you were only allowed to write stuff, but then you began appearing in front of the camera and proved your worth. Is this correct?
No, it was more the other way around, really. I only got, I mean, I've not done too much writing for the TV. I normally, if you hear, certainly if you hear me saying it, I've always written it. And it's quite rare to hear somebody else reading my script. And actually, I never enjoy it very much, because I always think, oh, you know, that joke worked when I said it, and I don't know whether it does when you're saying it. And I once had the experience of writing a script for an on-camera presenter at a live event, and I could see the gag coming towards her from the autocue, and I saw that moment when she said, "I'm ducking this one." So I think that, you know, I much prefer to perform my own material.
And you're tremendously good at it. Take that from me. Now, I want to talk about just a couple of your programs. No time to mention all of them, because, of course, no self-respecting documentary is complete without you head. But the one that gave me the most pleasure and looked as though it did likewise for you and your co-star was a documentary called Premium Bond.
Oh yeah,
we talked about this early private, in fact, because I enjoyed it so much I had to contact you. You and Mark Gatiss talking about your favourite actor as Bond. Was it as much fun as it looked?
Yes, it was. That was us locked up for a day in a martini bar in Covent Garden. Sunday afternoon it was. And yeah, we just sat there in the dark all day. Apart from the bit where we restaged, we tried to create a Bond title sequence with some projections, and Mark and I kind of doing our kind of well, it isn't Shirley Eaton, is it, in the title sequence? But we were trying to channel that kind of vibe, really.
Is it Margaret Nolan? I'm guessing.
Maybe I'm not. I'm not sure. I'm not sure who those figures are who we see. But yeah, it was great. It was great.
I hoped so. And just remind us, for those of us who didn't see it, who did you end up deciding was the best Bond of them all?
Well, Mark went for Connery, and I plumped for Timothy Dalton. Simply because I wish he's such a good actor. And he had the misfortune to be Bond in a kind of interregnum period when it proved impossible to make one. So really we were robbed of a couple of his. So in a way I was voting for something in my imagination as much as for something that was really there.
I'm inclined to agree. Now, we can't go any further without talking about Doctor Who. So, I mean, I did watch it from the first episode, never from behind the sofa. I was
No, nor me.
no, did that?
No.
I don't really believe it did. You are now one of the world's greatest authorities on Doctor Who.
No, I really am not. There are so many people. No, I've got to decline that one.
The lady doth protest too much.
No way.
Well, for example, let's test you. Do you know what's significant about the date November the 23rd?
Oh, that's too easy. You don't have to be a Doctor Who fan to know that. That's the date that's the date that Doctor Who launched.
I didn't know that. I had to be told.
That's not even pub quiz machine level. That I don't think. That's not. You can't get your black belt in Doctor Who from that. That's 101.
All right. If you were on Mastermind, would Doctor Who be your specialist subject?
Well, it might be, but I think you're not allowed to repeat subjects, and I think somebody's already done it.
Oh, they must.
But yeah, I'd be happy to do that. I think, yeah.
What other show would you go on? Would you go on Strictly Come Dancing?
I have danced on television before. I danced. Me and Zena Sarawiwa one year presented the Edinburgh Festival coverage, and we had a day of Argentinian tango lessons. And I can remember we went and we did it on stage with them, and it was filmed for BBC Two. And I can still remember the moment when, the first 5 steps I could remember. And then it was like stepping out into the abyss, really. And I had no idea what my feet should be doing. And somehow the very skilled lady who was leading me across that dance floor managed to stop me from falling over. Weirdly, when I look back at it, it looked okay, but I have no idea what I was doing.
The things we're learning on this episode, but what about the answer to my question? Would you do Strictly?
Well, if they were stupid enough to ask, I think I'd be foolish to say no, wouldn't I?
And I'd be foolish not to. Let's talk about radio, because you're virtually on 24 hours a day now. I don't know how we managed to grab you for this 45 minutes. One of my favorite shows that you do is called The Philosopher's Arms. It must, I think we've had this conversation in Radio Times, but what was it inspired by your university days?
Oh, no. I wasn't one of those. I rarely went to the pub that much, really, during my university days, because I hated coming home and smelling of cigarette smoke. I'm so much happier since the smoking ban there has come in. So no, really. It was. The show wasn't my idea. Although I don't know. Maybe I might have thought of the title, but there's no there's no glory in that. Yeah, very enjoyable series. Going to pubs, doing philosophy, but also finding people who have had some kind of real life experience that reflects some philosophical question. Like we did one about the continuity of identity over time. Are you really the same person who you were in the past, when biologically you're absolutely not? There's not a cell in you that was there, I think, 7 years before. You're completely renewed. And we had a woman on there who had been in a car crash and had totally forgotten everything from before the crash, but said what she'd heard about this person before the crash, she didn't like very much. So it's a totally fascinating thing to make, and the people in the pub are always brilliant.
Yes, for those who haven't heard, Matthew is in a pub with drinkers. I mean, he's calling them philosophical issues, but I have to remind you, Matthew, that one of the subjects under the discussion was, is a Jaffa cake a biscuit?
Well, this goes back to Aristotle. This question,
Go on.
what is what gives a thing its qualities, so that we can name it and say what it is. That was a philosophical question, but it also was an excuse to commission one of the Bake Off bakers to make the biggest ever Jaffa cake constructed. And although I had absolutely nothing to do with this process other than officiate and carry a great slab of it home in a taxi, the taxi driver, I think, thought was some narcotic substance, because it was all wrapped up in a slightly suspect way. And for that, those of us who worked on that program, we're all in the Guinness Book of Records for having made the. I've got a certificate on the wall in there for being responsible, which I'm really not, for the biggest Jaffa cake ever created.
Well, do you now know the official distinction between a cake and a biscuit?
Now you're testing me here, because I think I can't give you a definition, but I can tell you the process. You would decide on the qualities, what qualities a cake or a biscuit had, and you would then ask yourself, how many of these qualities does a Jaffa cake have? And that would allow you to make your decision. I think a lot of it is to do with whether or not it goes, when it goes off, it goes soft or it goes hard. That was one of the key distinguishing features. That a biscuit goes soft, but a cake goes hard.
That's what I'd heard. Is an urban myth or what? But it is a fact, though. Imagine a ginger nut, which is inescapably a biscuit, after 2 weeks.
Ineluctably, I would say. You make me think of an old aristocratic lady who told me that the only advice her mother had ever given her on her wedding night was never put sweet and savory biscuits in the same tin. And I think of this every time I go to the biscuit tin, which is frequently.
Moi aussi. So a Jaffa cake is, in fact, then, by this standard, a biscuit.
No, it's a. Oh, now this is. It shows you that really the process is more important than the answer, doesn't it? It's a.
Goes hard.
It's a cake. It's a cake, isn't it?
It's a cake.
Yeah.
Okay, we've established.
Yeah.
Thank the Lord. Now, we're on to the subject of radio now, and as I said in my introduction, it just astounds me how you're physically capable of researching so many shows. So there's a weekly show called The Sound of Cinema. You have to research all those film soundtracks. You're on another series called Free Thinking every night. How are there enough hours in the day to do all the research for these programs?
Well, I only do one of those a week, and not every week. So it's not, you've made it sound a bit more Stakhanovite than it is really. But that's the most I'm not saying the most, but that's one of the things that makes it so enjoyable. I never really feel like I left school, because every week I've got a pile of books I need to read, and I'm usually talking to the author, and or some question I've got to get to grips with. So it's I mean, it really is. I mean, it's such a pleasure, really, because I get an excuse, really, to just try and familiarize myself with things that I might not really know anything about at all, enough to be able to hold a conversation about it with some expert. And also, if I'm mystified by things, I can convey that, and hopefully that helps the listener.
Well, for my money, you, more than anyone, has made Radio 3 more populist. And I quote as an example of this a remarkable program you did, trying to recreate a very early, I think I'm right in saying it was 1920s, BBC attempt to prove or otherwise extrasensory perception.
Oh, yes.
There you were on Radio 3 asking listeners to think of a car.
Yeah. Yes, it was a throwback to something that was done in the 20s on a bigger scale. I should say they had like a group. They had a group of people from the Society for Psychical Research trying to kind of channel their thoughts out into the world across the ether, and listeners at home wrote down what they thought these guys were thinking of, and then they checked it all out, and surprisingly enough didn't produce overwhelming evidence that extrasensory perception was possible.
And in your version, Dr. Richard Wiseman thought of a card, and then at that point, we listening at home, try and work out what he was thinking. So I thought of the King of Hearts. Mm-hmm. It was wrong. He didn't choose that card, but he did say that in similar experiments, a lot of people choose the King of Hearts.
Yes, this is what the value of the experiment proved to be, that it showed something about how the mind works, because certain cards were thought of with much more frequency than others. So although it doesn't tell you anything about what's going on beyond the veil, it does tell us something about what's going on in our heads as regards numbers and symbols are concerned.
And that's why Matthew Sweet is my favourite broadcaster. Now, we're coming to the end of the programme. I knew this would happen. Time flies on these shows, but we can't stop without mentioning what I believe to be your favourite TV channel. I say this because you keep mentioning it on Twitter, and you'll know which channel.
I do. Talking Pictures TV. Now, you see, when I was writing Shepperton Babylon, I wanted to do a kind of a deep dive into the lower depths of British cinema, explore what was often called the lost continent of British cinema. But Talking Pictures TV just takes you around that continent. Whatever time of the day you tune in, there's something that I, back in 2001, 2002, had to really struggle to find. I would have to watch them on 35mm in the depths of the British Film Institute, or get them on VHS from, well, who knows where, really. But now it's possible to just that all just comes flooding in, and it's wonderful because you never really know what you're going to get next, do you? And even the bad films and the boring films bring you into something that's valuable, that a picture of Britain in that moment.
What's one of your most exciting discoveries on Talking Pictures?
Oh, well, you know what? I think I'm about to watch it tonight, actually. The night this goes out, there is a film I've never seen before that is about is a sort of a kind of drama documentary about brainwashing in the Korean War, starring Wilfrid Bramble. Now, I did not know the existence of this film until somebody mentioned it to me. I think possibly a couple of months ago, and they nudged me on Twitter yesterday saying it's on, and there it is, Captured, I think it's called. Wilfrid Bramble and Ray Brooks are in it, and it's about, in a way, the myth of brainwashing in the Korean War.
And I'm going to throw back at you in turn, because I have a feeling you did see it, and I absolutely loved it. Corridor of Mirrors.
Yeah, what a weird and eccentric film that is. Yes, a kind of made very cheaply by a very confident, not really a star, Adana Romney. It was a sort of a self-financed film of the late 40s. You can see when you look at it that it's filmed in an unheated studio, and it has this real after hours quality, like they sneaked in to the studio and filmed it there overnight. And it's her and Eric Portman, and look at it now, and it has this sort of, it's like a dream film. It's got a kind of gothic vibe to it, but it's also a little bit like La Belle et la Bête. I mean, it's quite poetic and fancy, really, and yet nobody really wanted to make it. The star just sort of made it happen through pure effort of will and the money that she raised herself.
I hope we have encouraged you to watch these two films, Captured and Corridor of Mirrors, when they turn up next on Talking Pictures. Thanks for reminding us of all this marvellous stuff you've lived through, Matthew. Alas, we have to stop there, but only on YouTube, because Patreon subscribers now get an extra 15 minutes of material, and this is where that banner turns up again, reminding you of the link. Matthew, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. I've been David McGillivray, and I'll be back with you again with another exciting guest at the same time next week. Please join me then. But from now, from me, bye.